Welcome back to the Jack Tomczak Show on AM 1280 The Patriot. Joining us now in studio-ish, actually not at all in studio, not at all, is congressional candidate and state representative Jeremy Munson. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for volunteering yourself. I don't just take anybody. You have to volunteer. Okay. Correct me where I'm wrong. You are currently a state rep. You have decided not to run for re-election as a state rep in the Minnesota House, and you've decided to run for the now open seat for Congress in the 1st Congressional District. Do I have that right?
You have that right. Correct.
Okay. Now, are you running in the special election to fill the vacancy left by the passing of Congressman Hagedorn and or the general election in the fall, which was going to happen anyway?
Yeah, I'm running.
Or both?
I'm running for both. There's a special election because of the vacancy, because it was so many days prior to the primary, which triggered the special election. Unfortunately, we have these early voting laws in Minnesota, so there's 45 days of early voting in front of that. And that means that the May 24th primary has 45 days of early voting. So we're going to be voting here in just like under 3 weeks. And it's incredibly fast. And of course, you know, there's 10 candidates that have jumped into the race on the Republican side. There's 8 Democrats, and then there's a candidate from each of the 2 pot parties that will be on the general election on primary day in August.
Okay. So the special election to fill the seat is on primary day for the general election that is in November.
Correct. It's so confusing. And keep in mind, the people that will be voting in the special primary on May 24th and the special general on primary day are in the old House or on the old congressional district boundaries. And then the August primary and the November election will be the new 1st Congressional District. So again, it's very, very confusing for the voters. And I've run an election similar to this 4 years ago when I ran in a special election, a special primary, a special general, and had to run again that same fall for the same seat. And so messaging to people, understanding early voting and how everything works, I come from an advantage having done this before.
Sure. So for the majority of voters who are now in the 1st Congressional District and will remain in the 1st Congressional District, they'll be able to vote for you twice. But for some, they'll be able to vote for you for the special election, but not in the November general election, because that is when the redistricting would take effect and they would be out of CD1 and in some other congressional district.
Yeah, that's correct. And so, and I've had phone calls from delegates in my district now in LeSueur County who can't be a delegate to the endorsing convention because the endorsing convention in April is actually for the November election.
Okay, now is there an endorsing convention for the special election to fill the vacancy of Congressman Hagedorn?
There is not. It is a straight.
Okay, so that's primary. Straight primary.
Yeah. There was going to be one called for, I think it was March 12th, which was going to be before the filing period ends so that people could abide by the endorsement. And I was excited for that to happen, but that endorsing convention was canceled.
Okay. All right. So who are you and why are you running?
Yeah. So I'm Jeremy Munson, and I'm a current representative for House District 23B in southern Minnesota, which includes the counties of Blue Earth County, Watonwan, Waseca, and LeSueur County. I've been in the legislature now 4.5 years. I've run 5 elections in 4 years, and I'm running for Congress because I want to bring the same level of accountability and transparency and honesty that I've worked on in St. Paul. I want to bring that to Washington, D.C. We have, honestly, Republicans and Democrats together have, over the past 4 decades, grown the nation's debt, right? Republicans have cut taxes without cutting spending. Democrats have increased spending. They've agreed to do both and then just borrow the difference. That's why we're $30 trillion in debt, and that's why we have runaway inflation. We need to push back on the establishment on both sides and actually reduce spending, reduce government's impact on people's lives, and restore liberty and freedom. And that's my focus, and that's what I want to work on in Washington, D.C.
Good. Will there be enough of you?
Well, certainly. I mean, when I announced my run, you get a lot of people from Washington D.C. that go, "Oh, there's a race that's happening when nothing else is going on. Let's dig in." And so they're looking at the candidates from afar, and they see my voting record. Both when I was serving in the majority and in the minority, I've been
Mm-hmm.
consistent, principled, pushing back on big government, reducing the spending, and then during the lockdowns, especially, I was elevated here because I was fighting immediately because it's unconstitutional what Governor Walz did, what Secretary of State Steve Simon did. And so they saw what I've been doing from DC and they started calling me. I started getting phone calls from Congressman Jim Jordan and Congressman Scott Perry, who run the House Freedom Caucus. This is a group of conservatives that meet and discuss legislation, do research, and come up with different ideas than the establishment Republicans. And so they reached out to me. They have about 42 people in their caucus. It's by invitation only. And they reached out and
Oh,
discussed what
very
they're doing.
exclusive.
Yeah, they discussed what they're doing and wanted to know if I would be willing to join them in their fight of to push for limited government. And this is exactly what I've been doing in Minnesota. And we are going to win the majority in Congress. We're going to take back the House and Senate. And in the majority, having such an enormous group of conservatives, some constitutional conservatives, we will have an impact. And so this is my group of people. This is why they came out and endorsed me for this race so early. And this is exciting that I can go there and have a direct impact while advocating for the needs of the first district, also pursuing freedom and liberty for all Americans.
Now, it's no secret that many Republicans and certainly many elected Republicans, they are just driving us over the cliff slower than the Democrats would be in terms of spending and spending programs. Not being one of those kinds of Republicans, are you facing any quote unquote establishment pushback with your run?
Sure. I mean, there's 10 Republicans in the race. The majority of us are real Republicans, and only maybe a handful of us or a few of us would be considered, conservatives or constitutional conservatives. There's certainly a run. The majority of the people running as Republicans are, big spenders, as long as they spend on more Republicanish stuff than the
Right?
Democrat side, right? In Minnesota, in the legislature, Republicans under control, when Republicans controlled the House and Senate, they still increased spending by double digit, right? Before, when inflation was a fraction of a percent or small percent, they still grew government by 10 to 12% per cycle, and that's just ridiculous. There's an automatic inflator. I mean, it's just irresponsible, and that's why I voted against all these multi-subject omnibus bills, which we have a constitutional requirement that every bill be a single subject.
You'd think that would prevent multi-subject omnibus bills, that pesky Constitution.
Yeah, but I mean, I follow the Constitution, and I can still advocate for bills. I still carry public works bills and infrastructure bills for my district. I still get legislation through, maybe not on its own because they cram it into some omnibus bill that I do vote against. But I write the bills. I get them through committee, and they get attached to some omnibus bill, so you can still be effective even in the minority. I've got bills through and signed into law as part of another one. Right, my legislation gets through. But but it's important to try to continue to work within the legislative process that we have, while also advocating for change.
Now, the one thing that the state government has one thing that the federal government has that the state government can't do is borrow billions and billions of dollars to keep spending. I've said this before, but Grover Norquist with Americans for Tax Reform years ago came up with the No New Taxes pledge that would get candidates to sign, and then everybody would pat themselves on the back like it was some great accomplishment. Well, that's only half the battle, as you've said earlier in this conversation. If you're going to cut taxes, great, but if you're going to ratchet up spending and borrow from my children and the future to pay for it, that doesn't help.
You're absolutely
Just
right.
tell me I'm right. There we go.
You're absolutely right. And then this is another question too, is I've been asked by people, will you vote to authorize the increase of the debt ceiling? I think it's irresponsible. This is what we have to push back on and say, no, we cannot kick the can down the road. We can't authorize trillions of spending more. We need to go back and look at all the programs we have, determine what is working, what isn't working, and we need to cut spending. We have to be honest with people. This is their money. The government can't spend $1 it hasn't taken from someone or put in the name of them on a credit card.
And what is the point of having a debt ceiling if every time Congress comes up against it, every time they vote to ignore that debt ceiling and increase it? It's not a ceiling then. It's just a marker that you are approaching and then passing and then making a different marker higher up. And something has to change. And for us right now, we're going to change into a commercial break. I'm interviewing congressional candidate Representative Jeremy Munson. You're listening to the Jack Tomczak Show on AM 1280, The Patriot. Welcome back to the Jack Tomczak Show. I'm talking with Jeremy Munson. He's a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives, and he is running in 2 elections this summer and fall, in the 1st Congressional District, the special election to replace the now passed Congressman Jim Hagedorn, and the general election in November. Jeremy, we left off talking about the debt ceiling and how Congress keeps voting to increase the debt ceiling. The first time I became aware of this, I was doing radio, and I contacted my former boss, Rod Grams. And I said, Rod, what is the point of the debt ceiling if they keep increasing it and just blowing right through it? And he said, well, there isn't one, clearly, because they keep ignoring it. And it seems, and you've pledged to vote against increasing the debt ceiling, at a bare minimum, it seems like that is a reasonable thing to do. We have a ceiling, let's respect it, and stay underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, I would vote for the debt ceiling increase if we could agree on getting through passing a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget, right?
Yeah, trade something for it.
Trade something for it. We are going
something worth it.
Right. This is so important. We need, as a state rep, I've been the chief author of a convention of states calling for term limits in U.S. Congress. Right. We have an 88-year-old senator who just filed for re-election for another 6-year term. Right. You walk around the halls of Congress and there are people shuffling with like 3 aides around them holding them up. They are so out of touch with their districts. It's just how long they can serve there. It's ridiculous. We need term limits.
And for the people who say that, well, we have term limits, they're called elections. That is an incredibly naive opinion, frankly. The advantages of incumbency, it's like what, 90% of Congress people get reelected. Like the system is rigged against challengers.
Yeah.
And we term limit the president. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with term limiting Congress and term limiting the U.S. Senate. Nothing wrong. I'm pro that all the way.
That's right. I mean, even in this race with 10 candidates and the election starting in less than 3 weeks, as a sitting legislator, I have name ID across the district. I mean, before I was a state rep, I was the 1st district party chair. So I worked alongside Congressman Hagedorn, walking in parades, getting to know all the delegates in the district. So I have an advantage going into that from my name ID as an activist. And then later as a state rep during COVID, doing news and media, doing a podcast, being on your radio show, getting out there the message that the governor and secretary of state are violating the Constitution, going to protest. All this stuff elevated my name recognition across the district. So as someone who's just coming into this, or as a former state rep who's been out of the game for more than a decade, wanting to get back involved, you're running against someone with name ID and someone with incumbency. And so that it is very difficult to get out there, and it's expensive to elevate your name to match someone who's an incumbent. So someone in Congress that's been there for 30 years, like Colin Peterson or somebody, running against him, even if his party is wrong and his votes are wrong. Running against someone with such name ID is so difficult.
Yeah.
This is why we need term limits.
And one of the things that in 1999, I was interning for Rod Graham's out in D.C., and I became aware of the franking privileges that members of Congress have. They can send mail for free to their constituents. Or at least it's out of their budget. I can't remember the specifics, but it's from the official office, and it's official. And Senator Grahams would use this, and this was 23 years ago. It was a letter, typed out letter with Rod's signature on the bottom. Fast forward to my next time working for a member of Congress, Michelle Bachmann, in 08 and 09. Franking had turned into campaign pieces. They were 4-color, glossy, heavy paperboard mailers with a picture of the congressperson. And she's not alone in this. Every member of Congress does it. And that is tens of thousands of dollars of incumbency advantage and years and years and years of doing that a challenger doesn't have. So yes, pro-term limits, get it done.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I've signed the term limits pledge. I just spoke with the head of the U.S. term limits group, and I will vote for term limits. It is the right thing to do. And I know carrying this legislation in the Minnesota State House every year since I've been in there, it's difficult to carry a bill where half the members of the legislature would be done if it passed.
Right.
It's hard to get that passed, but it is the right thing to do in standing on principle.
One of the reasons that I'm so pro initiative and referendum, which is a state thing and not a Minnesota state thing, is that there are a lot of things that legislators don't want to have happen because it will affect them personally. So I'm pro a mechanism that allows people to create law by going around the legislature. Because one of the things you're gonna of course, you know this, but you'll find in trying to get term limits in Congress is that they don't want it.
Yeah, that's
right. And they're in charge of whether or not it gets a vote.
Yeah, and the referendums can be turned against you too. And I've seen states that put a referendum on the ballot that's confusing. In order for legislators in Minnesota to give themselves a raise, they put a ballot initiative in because it's toxic to vote for your own raise. So they said, hey, how about we no longer allow legislators to set their own salaries, and we're going to have an outside group determine if they should get a raise. And everybody went to the ballots and went, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Even though what it turns out is that group just gave the legislature an enormous raise.
So George is doing the exact same thing this November. Same thing. It's cowardly.
Things can be worded strangely on the ballot. And there's a lot of money on these initiatives that get funded by outside groups. So honestly, I mean, we need to do the right thing. We need to elect people to Congress and to the legislature that are going to be honest with people and bring transparency and accountability to government.
So let me think of my next question here. We're almost out of time for the interview. I will let you get back out and door knock or parading, whatever you're doing. What separates you from your 9 Republican opponents heading into the primary?
Well, I served only a few months in the majority when I was first elected. I had one session of like 3 months and then that rest of that year in the majority. And then I was serving in the minority. I've been consistent in both the majority and the minority of voting for limited government, of standing up and being transparent. I'm not, even though I'm very conservative and one of the most conservative legislators in Minnesota, I work on civil liberties issues. I work on a lot of things across the aisle. And I want to bring that same accountability to Washington, D.C. I've engaged the voters in the legislative process. I was the first rep to live stream stuff on Facebook, showing what we're doing on the floor, involving them in the procedure. And yes, it upset a lot of sitting Republicans who stood behind me watching 700 people watch the live stream saying, Munson, what are you doing? I just had people texting me saying, why did I vote for this bill that grew government? And it has ruffled feathers because people are now watching what's going on. So I want to bring the same transparency to DC, and I'm asking people in the 1st District to get out and vote in the primary, again in the special general, and it's going to be an exciting year.
All right. What is your website so people can go and find out more about you and help?
Yeah, jeremymunson.com is where you can go out and watch the videos, see my positions, and get involved with the campaign.
All right. Thank you very much. Jeremy Munson, candidate for Congress in the 1st Congressional District. Thanks for joining us today. You're listening to the Jack Tomczak Show on AM 1280, The Patriot.